A blinding explosion tore through my peaceful morning like a timed bomb. I ran to the balcony and saw my Mercedes-AMG GT63S, $180,000, only 400 miles on it, burning furiously in the middle of the parking lot. Flames 9 feet high, melting metal, the smell of explosives rushing into my nose. Some HOA old lady had just crossed every legal boundary as if she were immune. The sight of my property destroyed by explosives, and knowing that Karen Pemberton was behind it with her fake authority, made my blood boil with rage. What happened next when she kept thinking she'd get away with it? It taught me why you should never mess with the ATF and FBI. If you hate HOA Karens, go ahead and comment. 3:47 a.m. The explosion tore through the night, and my life ended in fire and smoke. I knew immediately this was no accident, and I knew exactly who did it. I jolted awake, my wife Emily grabbing my arm in the darkness, both of us frozen before instinct kicked in. The windows rattled, the bed shook. I threw off the covers and ran to the balcony, my heart pounding in my ears. What I saw made my stomach drop. My Mercedes-AMG GT63S, $180,000, 400 miles on the odometer. Brilliant blue paint I'd spent weeks choosing was now a burning skeleton in our parking area. Flames shot 9 feet high, licking at the oak trees. Glass shards glittered across the asphalt. The smell hit me next, sharp and chemical. Not just gasoline, but something acrid that burned my nostrils, something industrial. And then I saw it, a small crater beneath where the engine used to be. The asphalt peeled back in a perfect circle. This was explosives. Emily appeared beside me, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide. "Marcus, oh my God, is that our car?" She gripped the railing, knuckles white, fear rippling across her face. Someone had planted a bomb 30 feet from where we slept. I pulled out my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher was calm, asking questions I barely registered. Yes, River Oaks subdivision. Yes, an explosion. No, no one hurt. Around us. Lights flicked on in neighboring houses. People stumbled onto lawns in pajamas, staring at the inferno. Mrs. Helen Parker, from 2 doors down, clutched her robe, mouth hanging open. The Mitchells across the street recorded everything, and standing on her perfectly manicured porch, arms crossed, was Karen Pemberton. She wasn't recording. She wasn't calling for help. She was just watching, even from 50 yards away. I could see her face, not shocked, not concerned, satisfaction, as our eyes met. She smiled, a thin, cruel curve, then turned and walked inside, pulling her robe tighter like she'd finished watching an entertaining show. 3 weeks earlier, I'd driven that car home for the first time. The engine purred. Heads turned as I rolled through the subdivision gates. I'd worked 5 years building my software consulting firm, and that AMG was my reward, proof that the sleepless nights had been worth it. I parked in my designated spot and got out to admire it. That's when I heard her voice, sharp as broken glass. Karen Pemberton, 58 years old, HOA president for 12 years, walked over with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. She said, "That's quite a vehicle, Marcus. Rather flashy for River Oaks. Don't you think we've always prided ourselves on understated elegance here?" I laughed it off, but her smile didn't waver. "I'll be bringing this up at the next board meeting. We may need to revisit our vehicle standards policy." I should have seen it then, the glint of something ugly behind her words. Karen had always been the type to obsess over paint colors and lawn heights, to send passive-aggressive emails about holiday decorations, to fine people for leaving trash cans out 20 minutes too long. Everyone in River Oaks had a Karen story, but this was different. This wasn't about petty power trips. This was jealousy, pure and venomous, the kind that festers when someone has too much time and too little joy. Just last week at the HOA meeting, Karen had made a weird comment about flammable materials in garages. She'd asked, almost casually, whether anyone knew the fire code regulations for residential storage of industrial chemicals. A few people exchanged glances, but no one thought much of it. And then there was the piece of paper I'd seen flutter from her bag as she stood up, a printed sheet with diagrams and what looked like detonation sequences. I hadn't picked it up. I'd assumed it was something related to her day job as a consultant for Anderson and Company. the construction firm that specialized in controlled demolitions around Houston. The fire trucks arrived, sirens wailing, red and white lights strobing. Firefighters jumped out, pulling hoses, shouting orders. I stood on my balcony watching them douse the flames, watching my car turn from burning wreck to smoking, blackened carcass. Emily wrapped her arm around my waist, still shaking, and asked, "Do you think it was an accident?" I looked at Karen's porch, at the closed door, at the single light in her upstairs window. I turned to my wife and said, "No, and I'm going to prove it, because 3 days ago, I'd installed a brand new 4K security camera system with cloud backup, motion activated, and night vision capable. Every angle of that parking area was covered. If someone had planted explosives under my car in the dead of night, their face was already uploaded to a server 2,000 miles away, time-stamped and crystal clear, waiting for me to press play. By 8 a.m., the fire was out, and my parking spot looked like a war zone. The local police had taped off the area, and a detective named Morrison was walking around the charred remains with a flashlight, crouching down to examine the blast crater. He was older, maybe 55, with gray hair and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too much. When he straightened up and walked over to where Emily and I stood on our front steps, his expression told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He said, "Mr. Thompson, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. That wasn't a gas leak or a faulty battery. Someone used military-grade explosives on your vehicle. I've already called the ATF. They'll want to talk to you." Emily's hand tightened around mine, and I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long before they get here?" Morrison glanced at his watch. "Agent Kovac is driving down from the Houston field office. Should be here by noon. In the meantime, I need you to think very carefully about anyone who might have a grudge against you." I didn't have to think. I told him about Karen, about the comment she'd made 3 weeks ago when I first parked the AMG, about her obsession with control and her thinly veiled threats at the HOA meeting. Morrison wrote everything down in his little notebook, nodding slowly, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. A middle-aged HOA president blowing up a car with C4. It sounded insane, even as I said it out loud, but then I mentioned the paper I'd seen fall from her bag, the one with the diagrams, and Morrison stopped writing. He looked up at me and asked, "You're sure it had detonation sequences on it?" I said yes. "Sure." And he made a note to follow up. Then he asked if I had any security footage, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction telling him about my 4K system with cloud backup. He wanted access immediately, so I pulled up the app on my phone right there on the steps and started scrubbing through the footage from the night before. It took me 20 minutes to find it, but when I did, my hands went cold. 3:12 a.m. A figure in dark clothing, face obscured by a hoodie, moving carefully across the parking lot with something in their hands. The motion-activated camera caught every step, every movement. The figure crouched down beside my car, working under the chassis for nearly 4 minutes, then stood up, looked directly at the camera for just a split second, and walked away. Morrison leaned in close, squinting at the screen, and said, "Can you zoom in on that face?" I could. I did. And there, caught in the infrared glow of the night vision, was a face I recognized instantly. Karen Pemberton. Older, yes, but unmistakable. The sharp cheekbones, the thin lips, the cold eyes. Morrison exhaled slowly and said, "Send me that footage, right now, and don't touch anything else on your system." He was already pulling out his phone, calling someone, and I heard him say, "ATF and federal warrant," and River Oaks before he stepped away. Emily was shaking beside me, whispering, "She really did it. Oh my God. Marcus, she really tried to kill us." I put my arm around her and said no. She didn't try to kill us. She tried to destroy something I loved, something that represented everything she couldn't have or control. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the car. This was about power. Karen had spent 12 years ruling River Oaks like her personal kingdom, and my AMG was a symbol of someone who didn't need her approval, didn't bow to her petty rules. I'd threatened her authority just by existing, just by being successful and visible, and that, apparently, was unforgivable. But there was something else gnawing at me, something I couldn't quite put together. Why now? Why risk federal charges over a car? There had to be more to this. I spent the rest of the morning digging. I called my neighbor, old Mrs. Parker, and asked her what she knew about the upcoming redevelopment project on the east side of River Oaks. She told me that a developer named Westfield Investments had been buying up properties for months, offering well above market value, and that Karen had been heavily involved in the negotiations as the HOA president. Mrs. Parker said Karen stood to make a significant consulting fee if the deal went through, but there were 5 holdouts, homeowners who refused to sell. I was one of them. I'd turned down Westfield's offer twice already because I loved this house, loved this neighborhood, and had no intention of leaving. Suddenly, everything made sense. Karen wasn't just jealous of my car, she needed me gone. If I sold, the project moved forward, and she collected her fee. The car was just the opening move, a way to make me feel unsafe, to pressure me into leaving. It was extortion disguised as vandalism. By the time Agent Sarah Kovacs arrived at noon, I had a theory and evidence to back it up. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately respected. She introduced herself, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Mr. Thompson, I understand you have footage of the person who planted the device." I showed her everything. The 3:12 a.m. timestamp, Karen's face, the 4 minutes of her working under my car. Kovacs watched in silence, her jaw tightening, and when the video ended, she looked at me and said, "This is federal jurisdiction now, bombing of property under Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 844. If convicted, she's looking at 5 to 20 years. We'll need to move fast before she tries to run." By Tuesday morning, I realized the explosion had only been the opening shot. The real attack came in the form of an envelope thick and cream-colored, stamped with the county seal. Inside was a civil lawsuit, Karen Pemberton versus Marcus Thompson. She was demanding $75,000 for damages to personal and community reputation. The claim accused me of defamation, harassment, and disruption of neighborhood harmony. I stood in the kitchen holding the papers, feeling that mix of disbelief and fury rise again. The woman who tried to blow up my car was now dragging me to court. That afternoon, whispers began to spread through River Oaks. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I passed, and a few people who once waved now pretended not to see me. Someone printed flyers claiming I was a troublemaker trying to ruin the peace of the community. Emily found one pinned to the bulletin board near the mailboxes and tore it down with shaking hands. "Reputation is power here," and Karen knew it better than anyone. She was attacking me in the court of perception long before we stepped into the real one. Agent Kovacs called the next morning. The ATF lab had finished analyzing the residue from the blast. It was C4, industrial grade, with a partially intact serial number. That meant it could be traced to the original shipment. She said they were cross-checking it with construction contractors licensed to use such material. When I hung up, something clicked in my mind. Karen once boasted about consulting for a demolition company called Anderson and Company. They had federal clearance to handle explosives. The connection was too precise to ignore. I searched my email archives until I found a message from Karen to Anderson's regional manager, written months ago, introducing herself as the community liaison for the upcoming redevelopment. I forwarded it to Kovacs and then met my attorney, Daniel Lee, downtown. Daniel was sharp, younger than me, always calm in a storm. While reviewing the lawsuit, he said the civil claim was weak but designed to drain time and money. Then he opened his laptop and showed me a file his investigator had discovered. It was a purchase order for explosive materials, dated 2 weeks before the blast. The buyer's name was K. Patterson, but the delivery address stopped me cold. 1247 Oakwood Lane, Karen's house. By Thursday, the tone of the investigation changed. The ATF submitted a request for a federal search warrant, and the FBI began monitoring Karen's phone records and financial activity. Kovacs told me over the phone that this was not just a crime of anger. It was premeditated. That night, I received an email from an untraceable address. The message contained only one line. "Karen is preparing to leave. She has a flight to Mexico City on November 12th. There was no greeting, no sign-off. Just those words burning on my screen like a fuse. I forwarded it to Kovacs. She replied within minutes, her message brief and steady. If she runs, the Bureau will intercept her at the airport. Federal warrants leave no shelter. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Emily was asleep upstairs, exhausted from days of tension. I thought about how easily normal life could unravel. One explosion, one lie, one desperate person unwilling to lose control. Every sound outside felt sharper, every shadow heavier. The following day, Daniel arranged a meeting with Kovacs and 2 ATF analysts. We gathered in a sterile conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The walls were lined with screens showing evidence logs and maps of River Oaks. Kovacs played the footage from my security system again, frame by frame, slowed to the millisecond. At 3:12 in the morning, the figure appeared. Hooded, calm, deliberate. She crouched beneath my AMG, worked for nearly 4 minutes, then looked straight at the camera. The infrared image was sharpened until there was no room for doubt. It was Karen, every feature unmistakable. When the playback ended, silence filled the room. Kovacs finally closed her laptop and said the case was strong enough for federal prosecution. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Daniel began listing next steps: court filings, coordination with the United States Attorney, and witness statements. But I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, on the street outside my home, on the neighbors who once smiled and now looked away, on Karen's face frozen in that ghostly light. River Oaks had always been her kingdom, built on control and fear disguised as civility. Now that the empire was cracking, she could sue, she could smear, she could even run. But she could not erase the truth caught on that camera. The explosion had been her first mistake. Trying to destroy me through reputation would be her last resort. The fire that started under my car had found its way back to her doorstep, and this time, it would not go out quietly. The morning of the announcement felt heavier than usual. Clouds hung low over Houston, and the air carried that stillness that comes before a storm. I sat at my desk, staring at the television on mute while Emily brewed coffee in the kitchen. The ATF seal flashed on the screen, and Agent Sarah Kovacs stepped up to the podium, flanked by 2 federal officers. Even without sound, I could see the weight in her expression when she finally began speaking. I turned up the volume and listened as every word landed like a verdict. "We have identified the individual responsible for the bombing incident in River Oaks," she said. "Fingerprint analysis confirms a match with Karen Pemberton, president of the River Oaks Homeowners Association. Security footage places her at the scene at 3:12 in the morning on October 15th, 2025. For a moment, I could not breathe. Hearing her name spoken under fluorescent lights, broadcast through official channels, felt unreal. Kovacs continued, explaining that the footage from my cloud backup system provided an unbroken record of the act. The timestamp matched the explosion's detonation pattern down to the second. The resolution of the 4K camera left no room for argument. Every frame told the truth. Karen Pemberton had done it. Emily covered her mouth, eyes wide, tears gathering before she could stop them. "It is over," she whispered, though her voice carried no relief. I nodded but said nothing. The truth had arrived, but victory felt hollow. For weeks, our lives had revolved around fear, suspicion, and humiliation. Now that the facts were public, the silence felt almost louder than the chaos before it. Kovacs kept speaking, detailing the chain of evidence. Fingerprints recovered from fragments of packaging matched Karen's government record from when she registered her business license 15 years ago. The remnants of C4 bore the same manufacturing batch number as the shipment found inside Karen's garage during the federal search. The warrant had been executed the night before. Inside, agents discovered a half-used spool of detonation cord, 2 sealed containers of explosive compound, and detailed notes referencing my address. It was irrefutable. Every thread connected back to her, every lie undone by her own carelessness. The pieces planted in earlier chapters of my life, the security footage, the fingerprint residue, the forged invoice, all converged into one undeniable story. When Kovacs ended the briefing, the room behind her erupted in questions from reporters, but I turned off the television. I did not need the noise. The facts were enough. Karen had crossed a line that no amount of neighborhood politics could explain away. Emily stood behind me, resting a hand on my shoulder. Her voice was steady now. She cannot hurt us anymore. That afternoon, River Oaks transformed. Cars slowed in front of Karen's house, and clusters of neighbors gathered on the sidewalks. Faces that once smiled politely, now twisted with disbelief. The community that once idolized her power began to fracture. By evening, the Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting in the community hall. I did not attend, but Daniel did. He told me later that the vote was unanimous. Karen Pemberton was officially removed from her position as president. Her allies said nothing. Some cried. Others walked out without a word. The empire of control she had built for over a decade collapsed in a single motion. The next morning, I received a message from Kovacs. "Be ready," it said. "She is trying to leave." Attached was a flight itinerary. Karen had purchased a ticket to Mexico City, departing that afternoon. The FBI was already watching the terminal. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, phone in hand, unable to decide whether to drive to the airport or wait for her call. Part of me wanted to see it happen, to witness the moment when power finally met consequence. By noon, my phone rang. It was Daniel. "They have eyes on her," he said. "She just cleared security." I could hear noise behind him. Voices, movement, the echo of an airport announcement. "She is at the check-in counter now," I said, listening to the muffled sounds until a shout cut through the background. The next voice was Kovacs herself. "We got her," she said. Later, I watched the footage on the evening news. Karen, dressed in a beige coat, hair disheveled, was dragging a suitcase toward the gate. Agents approached from both sides, calm but firm. She turned, startled, tried to step back, but it was too late. Her wrists were pulled behind her, the cuffs glinting under the terminal lights. Around her, passengers froze, whispering in confusion. The same woman who once ruled every board meeting now stood surrounded by federal officers, her face drained of color. The image lingered for several seconds before the camera cut away. Kovacs called again that night. Her voice was composed. "As always, we have her in custody. She will face federal charges under Title 18, United States Code, Section 844, subsection Y, bombing of property. The sentencing range is 5 to 20 years in federal prison." She paused. "You should know. Marcus, the evidence is airtight." She confessed to parts of it but still claims it was meant only as intimidation. I thanked her, though the word felt small compared to the gravity of what she had done. When I hung up, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. "Is it really finished?" she asked. I did not answer right away. In stories, justice arrives clean and complete. In life, it leaves residue. I stepped outside. The air smelled of rain and wet concrete. The parking spot where my car once stood was now a dark scar on the asphalt, half covered by fallen leaves. I thought about Karen sitting in a federal holding cell, stripped of her titles, her influence, her audience. For years, she had built her identity on power and fear. Now, both had deserted her. The silence of River Oaks felt different tonight. Not peaceful, but empty, as if the neighborhood itself was trying to remember how to breathe again. Emily joined me at the door. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked out at the dark street and said the only truth that felt certain. Now we rebuild. For the first time in weeks, I believed it. The evidence had spoken. The lies had fallen away. And the fire that once burned beneath my car had consumed the one who started it. Somewhere beyond the clouds, thunder rolled across the city, low and distant, like the sound of something finally ending. At 6 in the morning, the sound of engines shattered the quiet of River Oaks. Red and blue lights flashed across the street as federal vehicles lined the curb. Neighbors stepped out in robes and slippers, drawn by the commotion. The hum of radios and the sharp commands of agents cut through the dawn. The front door of Karen Pemberton's house burst open as the ATF and FBI entered in formation. Within minutes, they escorted her outside, wrists bound, her face pale as paper. Her silk robe fluttered in the wind as flashlights and camera shutters captured every second of her fall from power. The entire block watched from driveways and lawns, frozen in disbelief. For 12 years, Karen had ruled this neighborhood with precision and fear, enforcing her will through endless regulations and subtle threats. Now she stood on her own front steps, silent and trembling. A reporter shouted questions from behind the police tape, but she did not answer. Her eyes darted toward the crowd, searching for sympathy that no longer existed. The flashing lights reflected off the wet pavement, painting her in alternating shades of red and blue. By the time the convoy left, the street was silent again except for the hum of engines fading into the distance. That afternoon, the news spread through every corner of the city. The arrest of a homeowners association president for a federal bombing charge was unprecedented. I received a brief call from Agent Sarah Kovacs. She said Karen would be processed overnight and appear before the United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas in the morning. Her tone was calm but decisive. The case, she said, had become a symbol of how power could corrupt even the most ordinary corners of suburban life. I hung up and stood by the window, watching rain fall softly over the same street that had once been hers. The next day, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters, lawyers, and uniformed officers. I arrived early with my attorney, Daniel Lee, and took a seat in the back of the courtroom. The air was heavy with the low murmur of voices and the clatter of briefcases against marble floors. When the doors opened, Karen entered, flanked by federal marshals. Her wrists were free now, but the weight of restraint was still in her posture. She avoided my eyes as she sat beside her defense attorney, a man who looked more nervous than she did. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The hearing began. The prosecution spoke first. They presented the evidence methodically, one piece at a time. The 4K security footage showed Karen's face illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp as she placed the device beneath my car. The fingerprint analysis confirmed a 100% match between her prints and those lifted from the explosive packaging. The purchase invoice for the C4 listed her address, 1247 Oakwood Lane, and a false name that no longer protected her. A technician from Anderson & Company testified that she had purchased the materials for $8,000. Promising that it was for a personal project that required discretion. The prosecutor then displayed a series of emails and printed messages recovered from her computer. They revealed a chilling plan. Teach him a lesson. One line read, another message mentioned making Marcus understand his place. Each word carried her unmistakable tone. The same voice that once demanded compliance at every meeting. The room was silent as the prosecutor read aloud. Karen stared at the table, her hands trembling. When the last message was shown, her attorney whispered something, but she shook her head slowly, refusing to speak. Under the weight of evidence, her composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears as the prosecutor displayed the final photograph. Taken from the night of the bombing, she stood, voice shaking, and spoke directly to the judge. "I did it," she said. "I could not stand him flaunting that car, acting as if the rules did not apply. This neighborhood was mine. I managed it for 12 years. I only wanted him to respect that." Her voice broke as she wiped her face. "I never thought I would be caught. I just wanted him to remember who was in charge." The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents. The judge's face remained unreadable as he reviewed the notes before him. The prosecution requested that all charges proceed under Title 18, United States Code, Section 844, Subsection Y, for bombing of property. The courtroom clerk read aloud the penalties: 18 years in federal prison, restitution of $250,000 for damages and legal costs, a federal fine of $50,000, and a lifetime ban from holding any community office. The destruction of my Mercedes, valued at $180,000, was entered as part of the restitution claim. The judge nodded and said he would deliver the sentence before closing the session. When the verdict came, it felt both inevitable and surreal. The judge spoke clearly, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Karen Pemberton, you are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for the bombing of private property under Title 18, United States Code, Section 844, Subsection Y. You are ordered to pay $250,000 in restitution to Mr. Marcus Thompson and a federal fine of $50,000 to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. You are permanently barred from holding any leadership role within any community organization." He paused before adding, "Justice, though delayed, must be certain." Karen stood motionless, eyes vacant, lips trembling as two marshals stepped forward. The sound of the gavel struck the room like a thunderclap as they placed cuffs around her wrists. She turned slightly, her gaze brushing past me without focus. I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a strange quiet. The weight that had pressed on my chest for weeks began to lift, replaced by something heavier yet cleaner. She was led out through the side door, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded. The crowd outside would soon know the details, but I had already seen all I needed. When I stepped into the hallway, Agent Kovacs was waiting near the exit. Her posture was straight, her expression steady, but I saw a trace of relief behind her professionalism. She extended her hand, and I took it. "Justice served," she said simply. I nodded, unable to find words that matched the moment. Daniel joined us, holding a copy of the final order, and we walked toward the front steps of the courthouse. Outside, the sky had cleared, the air bright and sharp. I looked up at the building one last time before turning away. As we walked to the parking lot, Emily called to say she had seen the news and was waiting at home. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in weeks. The road ahead was quiet, lined with trees and fresh rain. For the first time since the explosion, I felt something close to peace. The neighborhood that once trembled under fear would wake tomorrow to calm streets and open doors. The fire that began with destruction had ended with truth. And in that truth, there was finally room to breathe again. The verdict changed more than my life. Within a week, the Houston Chronicle published the story across its Sunday edition. The headline named Karen Pemberton as the first Homeowners Association president in Texas to face a federal bombing conviction. Her name, once spoken with deference, now appeared beside words like fraud, conspiracy, and imprisonment. The article included a statement from the new board of River Oaks, acknowledging the harm caused by years of unchecked authority. They promised reform, transparency, and accountability. It was not redemption, but it was a start. A week later, the community gathered in the River Oaks Hall for the first time in years. The room was full without tension. People who once whispered accusations now approached me openly. The new board chair, a quiet man named Robert Lang, stood before everyone and read a prepared statement. On behalf of the River Oaks community, we sincerely apologize to Mr. Marcus Thompson for the injustices he endured. His voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. When the applause came, it was hesitant at first, then unified. The air felt lighter. The walls seemed to breathe again. The following month, the restitution was processed, $250,000 transferred into my account. Not as a reward, but as closure. I decided to use it for something symbolic. I ordered a new Mercedes-AMG GT63S, painted brilliant blue, identical to the car that once burned in the night. When it arrived, I parked it in the same spot, beneath the same patch of morning sunlight. The scent of leather and new metal filled the air as I stepped out. On the windshield, I placed a small, transparent sign that read, "Justice Served, Federal Court, 2025. Neighbors stopped by that afternoon, some with cautious smiles, others with genuine warmth. Children rode bicycles across the cul-de-sac, and for the first time, I heard laughter echo without tension. The street, once haunted by fear and suspicion, felt ordinary again. I realized then how peace rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes quietly, through time, through truth, through persistence. The sound of the AMG engine filled the driveway as I started it for the first time. A deep, smooth growl replaced the memory of fire and sirens that had once filled this place. When I drove through the gates of River Oaks, the sun was setting behind the oaks, painting the houses in shades of gold and amber. The V8 bi-turbo hummed low, steady, unafraid. The road that once carried chaos now held silence and clarity. I passed the corner where the first responders had once stood, where neighbors had once gathered to watch destruction. Now it was empty, peaceful, almost sacred in its stillness. I pressed the accelerator lightly, feeling the machine surge forward, powerful but controlled. The sound was not rage, it was a renewal. That evening, an email arrived from Agent Sarah Kovacs. Her tone was as precise as ever. "Mr. Thompson, Karen Pemberton has begun serving her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Segoville, Texas. 18 years, no early parole. Congratulations on your patience and your faith in the justice system. I read the message twice, then closed the laptop. Outside the window, the sky was fading to deep violet, and the streetlights flickered to life one by one. The neighborhood looked calm, untouched by the storm that had passed through it. I stepped onto the balcony. The breeze carried the scent of rain and grass. Across the street, Mrs. Parker waved from her porch, and I raised my hand in return. Emily joined me, leaning on the railing. The AMG sat below, gleaming under the last light of day. Its color reflected the sky, endless and unbroken. In that moment, the months of fear and accusation felt distant, dissolved into the hum of the evening. I realized I had not just reclaimed my car or my name. I had reclaimed my peace. No violence, no revenge, only evidence, law, and patience. That is how real justice wins. And for everyone listening to this story from Karma Clause, remember this truth. In every act of injustice, there lies a moment to choose between anger and discipline. Choose discipline. Trust the process. Justice may move slowly, but it never stops.